Dejounte Murray is one of the league's best young point guards due to his fantastic length and defensive instincts. However, those defensive abilities have caused some frustration to a few of his opponents, leading to a few arguments and fights throughout his young and promising career in the NBA so far. In this video, we've gathered all of the best fights involving Dejounte Murray throughout his career for you all to watch, and there are quite a few good ones in here. Make sure you stick around until the end of the video to find out which NBA player laughed and trash talk Murray right in the middle of a play. But for now, let's dive into the first fight. This first fight happened to come between Dejounte Murray and John Collins. The San Antonio Spurs were up against the Atlanta Hawks during a regular season game when things got a little heated. The play was already whistled over, but there was still some action going on. Collins had knocked over DeMar DeRozan during the play, and then tried to step over him while he was being helped up by a teammate. Once they were able to get him up, a few players started jawing with Collins, including Dejounte Murray. Murray was walking back over to his bench when he randomly turned around and started yelling back at Collins, who'd been shouting over towards him while he was walking away. The two players started to walk over to one another while arguing, and everybody in the arena knew what could have been coming up next if they didn't intervene. Keldon Johnson and DeMar DeRozan each jumped in to defend their teammate and shout a few words over to Collins themselves. Even their future Hall of Fame head coach Greg Popovich jumped in to pull some of his teammates back a little bit and try to avoid any potential punishments. You know that a fight has the potential to be serious when Coach Pop jumps onto the court to try and pull his players away from an argument. We never get to hear what these players are actually saying to each other on the court, but I can only imagine it wasn't anything pretty. But it wasn't just all Spurs players going over to this pile. Kevin Schroder of the Hawks sprinted back into frame so that he could push Collins away from the trio of San Antonio players. Once Schroder was able to get Collins away from the Spurs players, Trae Young walked back over to Collins to calm him down as they were walking away to their own bench. Collins seemed fired up about the incident, while the Spurs players just looked mad more than anything else, just like when Murray was furious about this other incident. Next up, we have the fight between Dejounte Murray and one of the greatest Houston Rockets players of all time, James Harden. This was one of the more entertaining fights of Murray's young career so far, and for good reason. Harden got the ball stripped away from him during a possession, and to him it felt like he was fouled when Murray swiped. But regardless, James chased after him anyways to avoid giving him free points. Murray scored a layup, and when he landed, he turned around and him and Harden bumped right into one another. Harden immediately pushed Murray out of the way, and Murray extended his arm and pointed right at him while yelling back at him. They were going at it verbally for a while before the refs got a handle on things and settled them both down before things got even more heated. Thankfully, it didn't last very long, as the two didn't really seem to have intentions of fighting one another right then and there, but it did raise some questions about what could have happened had they not been separated that quickly. Guess that's something we'll never get the pleasure of knowing. Just like how we will never know what could have happened in this next clip if a few things ended up going differently. The San Antonio Spurs were up against the Portland Trail Blazers, and Derrick Jones Jr. ended up finding himself on a nice fast break. Given how fantastic of a dunker he is, and the fact that he won the dunk contest just a few years ago, the Trailblazers were pretty much guaranteed 2 points. However, Dejounte Murray was one of the few Spurs players sprinting after him in an effort to stop him from dunking the basketball and picking up 2 more points for his team. Murray wrapped Jones up with 2 arms just a second after Jones jumped up to dunk the basketball, causing him to fall hard onto the ground and slam against the stanchion under the net. Had Jones not hurt his arm on the fall, he almost certainly would have been pissed off at the foul. This never ended up being a true fight, but one can imagine that they would have gotten up in each other's faces had Jones not fallen as hard as he did. Regardless, other Trailblazers players weren't happy with the foul on Murray, and they may have even exchanged some words with him a little bit after while Jones was being attended to by the medical staff. Now, before we move on to this next fight, we want to remind you to make sure to stay tuned until the final clip we have in store, because this one happened right in the middle of a play and nobody even noticed. For now though, we'll actually go back to the battle between Murray and Harden. These two didn't just have beef with one another during that other game from earlier in the video. In fact, they fought a few times already. This one happened pretty recently with James Harden on the Brooklyn Nets. Murray grabbed a loose ball near the out-of-bounds line right in front of Harden, though it looked like Harden stuck his right foot out to try and trip Murray mid-play. Murray fell a little awkwardly but never hit the court floor. rather throwing the ball back into the court and having the referees blow a whistle on Harden. James was furious over the call and acted shocked that he even did anything wrong there. Dejounte saw his shock and frustration and took to Twitter to unleash some frustration of his own over the superstar guard, saying, "Tried to trip me and play victim like a sucker. Good thing I'm just now seeing this and ain't know what happened until now." Then he proceeded to leave a clown emoji at the end of the tweet and call out Harden specifically. Given how Murray is still so early into his NBA career, we could definitely see him and Harden duel it out a few more times when their teams match up. It seems like they each have quite a bit of hatred for one another, and it may even result in a physical fight on the court in the coming years unless these two are able to fix things off the court. There wasn't much more to this whole tripping story after Murray posted that on his Twitter, but Spurs fans were still outraged. Some were even claiming that Harden should be heavily fined, while others were begging for a suspension for the Nets superstar. Now we get to a fight that was basically just anger for the Spurs point guard. Surprisingly enough, this fight didn't end up being against a human player, but rather an inanimate object on the court. The Spurs and the Thunder were in a close game that was tied with just a few seconds left. Al Horford drove into the lane and was able to kick it out to a wide-open Lou Dort, who was standing in the corner. Dort took his shot with nobody near him and ended up draining it, winning the game for the Thunder as the clock expired. The Spurs players on the court didn't even know what to do, and they were all just walking around in shock that they would be going home with a loss despite seemingly wrapping the game up. Then Murray came flying out of the other corner of the court and booted the basketball into the upper levels of the stands in frustration that the team had just lost the game. The NBA took note of his actions and ended up handing him a big $25,000 fine. Though if there were fans in the arena for this matchup, his punishment not only would have been a lot bigger, but there could have been another fight taking place if the ball would have made contact with the wrong person. Thankfully, though, none of that happened, but I guess it's safe to say that Murray and that specific basketball aren't on really good speaking terms at the moment. Finally, we come to the last and probably the most hilarious fight throughout Dejounte Murray's career. The Spurs were up against the Oklahoma City Thunder, and Dennis Schroder was bringing the ball up court. As he was dribbling across half court, he realized that Murray would be his primary defender on the play. Slow motion clips could be shown of Schroder trash talking as he was about to dribble right past him. Him and Murray were staring right at each other, but it doesn't seem like Murray said much after Dennis started driving in, though I assume he had some words to say while Schroder was coming up the basketball court with the ball. Then, as both players turned to drive into the lane, Dennis pulled the ball back and Murray had to come to a complete stop to get his bearings back. It was one of those crossovers that make you stop and think about what just happened because it was that nasty. And Schroder knew it, so when he pulled the ball back, he instantly made a face and started trash talking while Murray desperately tried to get back in his face to defend him. Murray may be one of the tougher players in the league and probably one of the best defensive guards that the NBA has to offer, but to put it nicely, he lost this one. Want more fights? Then click on one of the videos that appears on your screen.